Couples who stayed as virgins till death did them apart maybe sound shocking, right? But is real. This is a true story that happened in Portland between Elliot and Grace. Among the few items in Elliot's will was a note that read, "We were told love had to look a certain way." Ours never fit the script, but it was real. It lasted. It was enough. Elliot and Grace met in their early 30s at a small book club in Portland, Oregon. Both were shy, deeply thoughtful people who preferred quiet evenings over large gatherings. Elliot Jameson was a quiet, deliberate man in his early 30s when he met Grace Lynn at a local book club hosted at a small independent bookstore in Portland. Elliot worked at the local library and archivist by trade, a poet by habit. Grace was a freelance illustrator who specialized in botanical drawings and often had ink smudges on her fingertips. Their first conversation was about Jane Eyre. Grace had shared a quiet frustration during the discussion. Why must love always be so desperate and consuming? Elliot nodded, responding, "Some of us would rather just grow next to each other, like trees sharing sunlight." That line stayed with her. Over the next few months, they began spending more time together outside of book club. It started with weekend visits to the Japanese garden, long silences punctuated by shared thoughts about clouds, moss, or the way koi fish drifted in water. They bonded over mundane things, classical music played on low volume, documentaries about fungi, and collecting postcards they never sent. The conversation that changed everything. About a year into their friendship, while walking along Forest Park's trail on a foggy fall morning, Grace asked Elliot gently, "Have you ever been in love?" Elliot paused for a while, then answered, "I think so, but I've never wanted what people expect from love. I've never felt the part about sex. It's never called to me." Grace didn't respond right away. She picked up a red maple leaf from the path, examined its veins. Then she said, "I've always felt like I was too much or not enough for the people I've dated. Maybe both." There was silence. It wasn't awkward, just thick with understanding. Elliot finally said, "Would you want to try something different? A life that's ours, but doesn't have to follow a rule book?" Grace nodded. Yes. They moved in together a few months later, into a one-bedroom apartment filled with houseplants, books, and framed art. They converted the dining nook into an art corner for Grace and a small poetry desk for Elliot. They had separate beds at first, then eventually chose to sleep in the same bed. Not for anything physical, but for the comfort of proximity. Sometimes they held hands while they slept. Every year, on the first day of spring, they would walk to the oak tree near Laurelhurst Park, the same one where they had once sat in silence during their first spring together and exchanged letters they had written for each other. No audience, no ceremony, just the ritual. Their letters weren't flowery. One of Grace's said, "There's nothing you need to do to be loved by me. Just sit beside me and breathe." Elliot's reply that same, "The world expects fire and thunder from love. I prefer rain and roots." They never told most people about their choice to remain virgins. It wasn't a declaration or a point of pride. It was simply irrelevant. What mattered to them was presence, trust, and the rare joy of being completely seen. Grace developed a rare form of leukemia in her early 70s. She spent her final weeks in hospice care at home in the small living room where they danced slowly to Chopin on lazy Sunday mornings. Elliot read to her every day mostly old love poems and Japanese haiku. Before she died, she whispered to him, "Thank you for letting me be enough." Elliot stayed in the apartment for another year. He kept her art supplies untouched, watered her plants, reread her letters. On the anniversary of her passing, he returned to their oak tree one last time. He left 2 folded papers at its base, tied together with a piece of string. He died a few weeks later, quietly in his sleep. In his will, he left the apartment to a local youth writing program, along with a note. "We lived a different kind of love, not louder, not lesser, just ours. If you find someone who hears your silence and still stays, keep them.